June 12, 2014. Emily Richardson stood at the altar of St. Michael's Cathedral in her grandmother's antique lace wedding dress, surrounded by 200 friends and family members, waiting for the moment she had dreamed about since she was 6 years old. The church was decorated with white roses and baby's breath. The string quartet was playing Canon in D, and everyone was smiling as they waited for David Matthews to walk down the aisle and marry the woman who had loved him completely for 5 years. But David never appeared. At 3:17 p.m., exactly 17 minutes after the ceremony was scheduled to begin, David's best man Jake walked slowly down the aisle with an expression that made Emily's stomach drop. The conversations in the church fell silent as guests realized something was terribly wrong. "Emily," Jake said quietly when he reached the altar, "David asked me to give you this." He handed her a folded piece of paper with her name written in David's handwriting she had seen on love letters, grocery lists, and the lease they had signed together just 3 months earlier for the apartment where they were supposed to start their married life. Emily's hand shook as she opened the note that would change her life forever. "Emily, I'm sorry. I can't do this. I'm not ready to get married, and I don't think I ever will be. I know this is the worst way to tell you, but I couldn't face saying it to your face. I've gone to stay with my brother in Colorado. Please don't try to find me. I hope someday you'll understand. David." 200 people watched as Emily Richardson read the note that ended her engagement, canceled her wedding, and destroyed the future she had spent 5 years planning. The silence in the church was deafening as guests realized they were witnessing not a celebration, but a devastation. Emily stood at that altar for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, holding a note that proved the man she had trusted with her heart was too cowardly to end their relationship like an adult. The humiliation was so complete and so public that Emily would later describe it as the moment her old life ended and she was forced to build an entirely new identity from the ashes of her shattered dreams. But this story isn't about the woman who was destroyed at that altar 10 years ago. This is about the woman she became in the decade that followed, and what happened when David Matthews finally got the courage to face the fiancé he had abandoned, only to discover that she had become someone he could never have imagined and could never deserve. Before that devastating June afternoon, Emily Richardson and David Matthews had been a couple everyone envied. They had met during their junior year at UCLA, where Emily was studying business administration, and David was pursuing his degree in marketing. Their relationship had been a classic college romance. They were each other's first serious love, best friends, and constant companions throughout their remaining university years. Emily had been completely devoted to David from their first date. She was the kind of girlfriend who remembered his favorite coffee order, supported him through difficult exams, and made their shared apartment feel like a warm, loving home. David was charming, ambitious, and seemed equally committed to building a future together. After graduation, they had moved to San Francisco, where Emily landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm, and David found work at a tech startup. They rented a beautiful apartment in the Marina District, adopted a golden retriever named Charlie, and began building the kind of adult life that seemed like a fairy tale to their friends and families. David had proposed on Emily's 25th birthday during a romantic weekend in Napa Valley. He had planned an elaborate proposal at sunset in a vineyard, with photographers hidden in the background to capture the moment Emily said yes. The proposal was everything Emily had dreamed of, romantic, thoughtful, and apparently sincere. "I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy," David had said when he got down on one knee. "You're my best friend, my soulmate, and the woman I want to grow old with. Will you marry me?" Emily's yes had been immediate and joyful. She had been hoping David would propose for months, and she was thrilled to finally be engaged to a man she assumed would be her husband and the father of her children. The 18 months between their engagement and the planned wedding had been filled with preparation, excitement, and what seemed like genuine happiness. Emily had thrown herself into wedding planning with the same dedication and attention to detail she brought to her professional work. She had researched venues, interviewed photographers, tasted dozens of cake flavors, and coordinated with bridesmaids to create what she believed would be the perfect celebration of their love. David had seemed enthusiastic about the wedding planning, at least initially. He had opinions about the venue, helped choose a menu, and appeared excited about their honeymoon plans in Italy. Emily had no reason to suspect that the man who had proposed to her so romantically and who seemed happy to discuss wedding details was having doubts about their relationship. But looking back after the disaster at the altar, Emily would realize there had been signs of David's growing anxiety about marriage that she had missed or dismissed. He had become more distant during the final months before their wedding, working longer hours and spending more time with single friends who made jokes about him losing his freedom. He had also begun questioning major life decisions more frequently, wondering if they should wait longer to buy a house or start having children. Emily had attributed David's pre-wedding jitters to normal anxiety about making such a major life commitment. She had reassured him that marriage would enhance their relationship rather than restrict it, and that they were making the right choice by formalizing their commitment to each other. What Emily hadn't realized was that David's doubts weren't about the timing of their marriage. They were about whether he wanted to be married to her at all. The aftermath of being left at the altar would test every aspect of Emily's character and force her to discover strengths she never knew she possessed. But first, she would have to survive the most humiliating experience of her life and find the courage to face a future she had never planned for. The immediate aftermath of David's abandonment was a blur of logistics, humiliation, and heartbreak that Emily would remember in fragments for the rest of her life. 200 wedding guests had to be informed that there would be no ceremony, no reception, and no celebration. The catered dinner had to be canceled, the honeymoon had to be called off, and hundreds of wedding gifts had to be returned. Emily's maid of honor, her best friend Sarah, took control of the practical details, while Emily sat in the church's bridal preparation room, still wearing her wedding dress and trying to process what had just happened to her life. "We need to make some phone calls," Sarah said gently, sitting beside Emily and taking her hand. "The catering company, the band, the photographer, they all need to know the wedding is canceled." "How do I explain this?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do I tell people that my fiancé decided on our wedding day that he didn't want to marry me?" The phone calls were excruciating. Emily had to contact vendors, cancel services, and explain to her extended family why they had traveled across the country for a wedding that wasn't going to happen. Each conversation was a fresh reminder that her relationship was over and her future had been destroyed. The financial impact was devastating. Emily and David had spent $35,000 on their wedding, money that was largely non-refundable since they were canceling on the day of the event. Emily was responsible for half of those costs, plus the apartment lease they had signed together, and the honeymoon expenses that couldn't be recovered. But the emotional impact was far worse than the financial consequences. Emily had to face the reality that the man she had planned to spend her life would have been too cowardly to have an honest conversation about his doubts. Instead, he had waited until their wedding day to destroy her dreams in the most public and humiliating way possible. "I felt like everyone was looking at me with pity," Emily would later recall. "I went from being the happy bride everyone was celebrating to being the woman who wasn't good enough to marry. The humiliation was so complete that I wanted to disappear." Emily took 2 weeks off work to process what had happened and begin the practical tasks of unwinding a life she had built around a relationship that no longer existed. She had to break the lease on their shared apartment, divide their possessions, and figure out how to rebuild her identity as a single woman after 5 years of being half a couple. The hardest part was the silence from David. After his cowardly note at the altar, he had completely disappeared from Emily's life. He didn't answer phone calls, respond to text messages, or make any effort to provide closure or explanation for his actions. Emily was left to guess at his motivations and process her grief without any input from the man who had caused it. Emily's friends and family were outraged on her behalf, but their anger couldn't heal the deep wound that David's abandonment had created in Emily's sense of self-worth and trust in relationships. Emily's recovery from being left at the altar would require her to rebuild not just her life, but her entire identity. The woman who had defined herself as David's fiancée would have to discover who she was as an independent person, and that journey would ultimately make her stronger than she had ever imagined possible. The first year after the altar abandonment was the darkest period of Emily's life, but it was also the beginning of a transformation that would define the next decade. Initially, Emily struggled with depression, anxiety, and a crisis of self-confidence that made it difficult for her to function normally in her personal and professional life. "I kept wondering what was wrong with me," Emily admitted during therapy sessions that became essential to her recovery. If David could walk away so easily, what did that say about my value as partner? Was I not worth fighting for? Was I not lovable enough to marry? Emily's therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, helped her understand that David's abandonment reflected his character flaws rather than her worth as a person. The process of rebuilding Emily's self-esteem required challenging the negative thoughts and assumptions that had taken root after her humiliating experience. The man who leaves his fiancé at the altar is showing you who he is, Dr. Walsh explained. Someone who truly loved and respected you would have had difficult conversations before the wedding day, not abandoned you in front of everyone you care about. As Emily began to heal emotionally, she also began to channel her pain into professional ambition. Her work at a consulting firm became an outlet for the energy and focus she had previously devoted to wedding planning and relationship building. Emily threw herself into challenging projects, worked longer hours than necessary, and began to distinguish herself as one of the firm's most dedicated and capable consultants. Work became my therapy, Emily reflected. Every successful project, every client who was satisfied with my work, every promotion I earned was proof that I was valuable and capable, even if David hadn't seen it. Emily's professional success accelerated rapidly as she devoted herself completely to career advancement. Within 2 years of being left at the altar, she had been promoted twice and was earning significantly more money than she had when she was planning to be David's wife. But Emily's transformation went beyond professional achievement. She began to rediscover interests and aspects of her personality that had been overshadowed during her relationship with David. She took art classes, traveled solo to countries she had always wanted to visit, and developed friendships that weren't connected to her previous life as half of a couple. I realized I had lost myself somewhere in the process of trying to be the perfect girlfriend and fiancé, Emily said. Being abandoned forced me to figure out who I was as an individual, and I discovered I was stronger and more interesting than I had ever known. By the 3rd anniversary of her wedding that never was, Emily had rebuilt her life so completely that she barely resembled the woman who had been devastated at the altar. She had been promoted to senior consultant, had traveled to 15 countries, and had developed the kind of confidence and independence that made her genuinely happy to be single. Emily's professional success would eventually lead her to start her own company, but her personal growth would prove even more valuable. The woman who had once needed David's approval to feel complete was becoming someone who didn't need anyone's validation to know her worth. 5 years after being left at the altar, Emily made the decision that would define the next phase of her transformation. She left her secure consulting job to start her own business strategy firm. The decision was risky, but Emily had developed the confidence and expertise to bet on herself in ways she never could have imagined when she was David's dependent fiancé. Starting my own company was terrifying, but it was also incredibly empowering, Emily explained. I was making a choice based purely on my own ambitions and abilities, not considering how it would affect a relationship or what a partner might think about my career priorities. Emily's consulting firm specialized in helping small businesses develop growth strategies and improve operational efficiency. Her combination of analytical skills, strategic thinking, and genuine care for her clients' success made her services extremely valuable in a competitive marketplace. Within 3 years, Emily's company had grown from a one-person operation to a team of 8 consultants serving clients across multiple industries. Her firm's reputation for delivering exceptional results led to rapid growth and increasingly high-profile projects. By 2022, 8 years after being abandoned at the altar, Emily had built a business worth over $2 million and had established herself as one of the most respected business strategists in San Francisco. She owned a beautiful home in Pacific Heights, drove a luxury car, and lived the kind of independent, successful life that would have been impossible if she had married David and settled into the conventional path they had planned together. But Emily's transformation wasn't just about professional success. She had also developed into someone who was genuinely happy with her single life and no longer defined herself in relation to romantic relationships. She had dated occasionally over the years, but she had never met anyone who added enough value to her life to justify compromising the independence and fulfillment she had worked so hard to achieve. I realized that I had spent my early 20s trying to be worthy of David's love, and my late 20s learning that I was worthy of my own love, Emily reflected. The woman who got left at that altar needed external validation to feel valuable. The woman I became knew her worth without needing anyone else to confirm it. Emily's story of transformation had become an inspiration to other women who had faced similar betrayals and setbacks. She occasionally spoke at business conferences and women's empowerment events, sharing her journey from altar abandonment to entrepreneurial success. The worst thing that ever happened to me turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, Emily would tell audiences. Being abandoned forced me to discover capabilities and strengths I never would have developed if I had gotten the life I thought I wanted. Emily's confidence, success, and genuine contentment with her life were about to be tested when the man who had destroyed her dreams decided he wanted to be part of them again. David's return after 10 years of silence would prove that some people never learn from their mistakes. But his attempt to win back the woman he had abandoned would reveal just how completely Emily had transformed from the person he remembered. On March 15th, 2024, almost 10 years to the day after he had left Emily at the altar, David Matthews walked into Emily's downtown San Francisco office without an appointment, carrying flowers and wearing the same hopeful expression he had worn when he proposed to her in Napa Valley. Emily was in a meeting with clients when her assistant informed her that someone was waiting to see her. When Emily walked into her reception area and saw David sitting there with a bouquet of white roses, the same flowers that had decorated their canceled wedding, her first emotion wasn't heartbreak or anger. It was complete indifference. The man who had once been the center of Emily's universe looked older, less confident, and somewhat desperate as he stood up to greet the woman he had abandoned. David had clearly expected to find someone who still resembled the heartbroken fiancé he had left behind, but the Emily standing before him was a completely different person. "Hello, David," Emily said calmly, her voice betraying none of the emotional turmoil he had probably expected. "This is a surprise." David's first words revealed that he had not prepared for the possibility that Emily might have changed during their decade apart. "Emily, you look different. Successful. I heard about your company." "What can I do for you, David?" Emily asked, checking her watch to indicate that her time was valuable and limited. "I have another meeting in 15 minutes. David's confidence faltered as he realized that Emily wasn't reacting with either anger or residual affection. She was treating him like any other unexpected visitor, politely but without any emotional investment in the conversation. "I came to talk to you about us," David said, offering the flowers. "I know I hurt you terribly, and I spent 10 years regretting what I did. I was young and scared, and I made the biggest mistake of my life when I walked away from you." Emily didn't take the flowers. Instead, she gestured for David to sit down while she remained standing, a power dynamic that made it clear who was in control of this conversation. "There is no us, David," Emily replied matter-of-factly. "There hasn't been an us since you decided to end our relationship via a note delivered at our wedding altar. That was 10 years ago." David had clearly prepared a speech about redemption and second chances, but Emily's composed response was derailing his expectations about how this reunion would unfold. "Emily, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you'll give me a chance to explain why I left and why I want to try again," David continued, his voice becoming more desperate. "I've spent 10 years realizing that you were the best thing that ever happened to me." Emily's response would teach David that the woman he had abandoned no longer existed, and the woman she had become had no interest in revisiting past relationships that had served their purpose. David's assumption that Emily would welcome his return revealed how little he understood about personal growth and consequences. The conversation that followed would become the most satisfying moment of Emily's transformation journey. Emily sat down across from David, not because she was interested in having a lengthy conversation, but because she realized this moment represented the completion of her healing journey. The man who had once had the power to destroy her dreams was now just another person requesting her time and attention. "David, I appreciate that you've had some realizations about our past relationship," Emily began, her tone professional and detached. "But I need you to understand something important. The woman you left at that altar doesn't exist anymore." David looked confused, as if he had expected Emily to be either angry or receptive, but not completely unmoved by his presence. "The Emily you knew was someone who defined her worth through your approval and built her dreams around your plans," Emily continued. The woman sitting across from you now has spent 10 years discovering that she doesn't need anyone's validation to be complete. But Emily, I know we could have something beautiful together, David insisted, still not grasping that his former fiancé had no interest in rekindling their relationship. I've grown up. I'm ready for commitment now. I want to marry you. Emily's response was swift and devastating. David, you're 10 years too late, and even if you weren't, you're not the kind of person I would choose to build a life with. The directness of Emily's rejection clearly shocked David, who had apparently expected that his willingness to take her back would be received as a generous offer rather than an irrelevant proposition. What do you mean I'm not the kind of person you'd choose? David asked, his voice revealing hurt and confusion. I mean that I now understand that someone who abandons his fiancée at the altar is someone who lacks the integrity, courage, and communication skills that are essential in a life partner. Emily explained calmly, your behavior 10 years ago showed me exactly who you are when faced with difficult decisions. David tried several different approaches to convince Emily to give him another chance, but her responses made it clear that she had no emotional investment in their conversation and no interest in revisiting their failed relationship. Emily, everyone deserves a second chance, David pleaded. People can change and grow. You're absolutely right, Emily agreed. I'm proof that people can change and grow. I've spent 10 years becoming someone stronger, more independent, and more fulfilled than I ever was when we were together. The growth you're asking me to acknowledge in you is the same growth that has made me completely uninterested in returning to old relationships that didn't serve me. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with David becoming increasingly desperate and Emily remaining completely composed. Finally, Emily stood up to indicate that the meeting was over. David, I wish you well in your life, but I need you to understand that we will never have a relationship again, Emily said with finality. Please don't contact me again. As David left her office, still carrying the rejected flowers, Emily felt a profound sense of closure. The man who had once had the power to devastate her with his approval or rejection had just discovered that she was completely indifferent to both. David's attempt to reconnect with Emily became the final chapter in her transformation story, but not in the way he had expected. Within hours of his office visit, David had sent Emily multiple text messages, called her personal phone number, and even contacted mutual friends to ask them to intercede on his behalf. Emily's response to David's persistent attempts at contact was to block his number, instruct her assistant to refuse any further visits from him, and move on with her life exactly as she had been living it before his unexpected appearance. But David's desperation escalated over following weeks. He began showing up at places where Emily conducted business, sending elaborate flower arrangements to her office, and even contacting Emily's clients to ask them to put in a good word for him. Emily's response to David's stalking behavior was swift and decisive. She contacted a lawyer, obtained a restraining order, and made it clear that any further contact would result in legal consequences. The David I knew 10 years ago was immature and cowardly, Emily told her friends. The David who showed up at my office is immature, cowardly, and entitled. He hasn't grown up, he's just gotten more desperate. Word of David's pathetic attempt to win Emily back spread quickly through their old social circle, and the consensus was unanimous. Emily had clearly evolved into someone remarkable, while David remained stuck in patterns of selfishness and poor judgment. Emily's handling of David's return became legendary among people who knew their history. She had demonstrated that the ultimate revenge wasn't anger or retaliation. It was becoming so successful and fulfilled that her former betrayer's approval became irrelevant. 6 months after David's failed reconciliation attempt, Emily received news that perfectly illustrated how completely their roles had reversed. David had been fired from his job for inappropriate behavior toward a female colleague, was going through an expensive divorce from a woman he had married and divorced during Emily's transformation years, and was facing financial difficulties that had forced him to move back in with his parents. Meanwhile, Emily's business had just landed its largest contract ever, a multi-million-dollar consulting agreement that would establish her firm as one of the premier business strategy companies on the West Coast. I realized that David's return wasn't actually about me at all, Emily reflected. He didn't come back because he had grown or changed or genuinely wanted to make amends. He came back because his life wasn't working out, and he thought I might be an easy solution to his problems. Emily's story became an inspiration for other women who had faced similar betrayals, proving that the best response to being abandoned or rejected is to become so successful and fulfilled that the person who hurt you becomes completely irrelevant to your happiness. A year after David's failed return, Emily met someone who truly deserved her transformed self. Dr. Michael Chun, a successful physician who appreciated her independence, supported her ambitions, and added genuine value to her already fulfilling life. Emily and Michael's relationship developed slowly and thoughtfully, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than desperate need or emotional dependency. When they got engaged in 2025, Emily planned a small, intimate ceremony that celebrated their partnership without any of the elaborate drama that had characterized her previous wedding plans. The difference between my relationship with David and my relationship with Michael is that I don't need Michael to complete me, Emily explained. I was already complete when I met him. He enhances my life, but he doesn't define it. Emily's wedding to Michael took place exactly 11 years after she was left at the altar by David. The ceremony was beautiful, intimate, and attended only by people who truly supported their relationship. There were no dramatic gestures, no desperate declarations, and no doubt about whether the groom would show up. Being left at the altar was the worst thing that happened to me at the time, Emily said during her wedding toast. But it forced me to become the woman I was always meant to be. If David hadn't abandoned me, I never would have discovered that I didn't need saving. I needed freedom to become myself. Emily's transformation from abandoned fiancé to successful entrepreneur and confident woman proved that sometimes the people who hurt us most actually do us the greatest favor by showing us we're stronger than we ever imagined. If Emily's story of ultimate transformation and vindication has inspired you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to remember that their worth isn't defined by other people's inability to recognize it. Subscribe for more incredible stories of people who turned their worst betrayals into their greatest triumphs. And let us know in the comments about your own experiences of finding strength after heartbreak. Remember, the best revenge isn't anger. It's becoming so successful and fulfilled that the people who hurt you become completely irrelevant to your happiness.